We've been told that we have an alarming and disconcerting interview style, so if we fire too many questions at you at once. Do you want to start off and then I'll chime in?
No, start.
You're in Ibiza, so it seems to me like that's probably a very good place to talk about the Spanish courts trying people for coca leaves as though it was cocaine, which is something that I've been interested in recently and heard about in a update call from the Ayahuasca Defence Fund in December, that there's been about 5 cases over the past 5 years where the courts have deliberately tried to interpret Mambe as being this equivalent weight in cocaine, and then that's had to be fought every time to make them accept that it's coca leaves. And yeah, I'm just wondering what you think is going on there and why they keep trying to do that, and kind of what's going on at a policy level that's like a kind of potentially willful misconstrual of what the substance is and how that works.
I think it's pure ignorance at every step. You know, the drug control, the international drug control laws. You know, one of the sort of foundational treaties is the one that was signed in '61, and that made 3 plants illegal, and only 3: cannabis, the coca leaf, and the popium opi, and also a bunch of the derivative products. So, you know, cocaine and heroin, etc., etc. This was, of course, you know, it's been fought by a number of countries because, of course, it was just sort of like outrageous sort of imposition of you know, certain countries who happen to have a problem with, you know, in this case cocaine or heroin, etc., over other countries that actually have been using these plants for thousands of years and had no problem at all. Like, you know, like Bolivia or Afghanistan or India. So this is a paradox. I mean, there's a number of plants and then also substances that have a history of traditional use, and I'm thinking, you know, ayahuasca and peyote and cannabis, and also, you know, coca leaf and opium. You know, most of the things that we consider drugs or illegal drugs that we call illegal drugs. And when you look at the sort of traditional use or the use in the countries of origin, you don't find a problem at all. They're actually quite sort of healthily integrated into the culture. They're highly valued and appreciated. And, you know, there's that doesn't mean that there's no abuse, but that the sort of the benefits far outweigh the problems.
And I suppose tobacco is another good example of that, but on the legal end, where it's actually the Western commercialization of it that's created the. But would you say that's maybe going on with the illegal substances as well, that it's the Western appetite for them that creates the problems in the countries much more so than use traditions changing within the country in their own right?
Yeah, it creates the problems and then it creates the law. So and then in 1971 there's a new convention, and this is the psychoactive substance one, and it has the 4 schedules, and then the, you know, and that's where all the, you know, LSD and DMT and you know amphetamines and all of these things get put in these schedules. And then no more plants are put in, because by 1971 probably they sort of realized that it's going to be impossible. If they have to outlaw all the plants that contain DMT, they're going to have to be hundreds of them. If they're going to have to outlaw, you know, plus at this point, they're also aware of the fact that, you know, these plants have a history of traditional use, and it's a little bit weird to, so they say, okay, internationally, we're not going to do this. We're just going to recommend that nationally countries, they write their own laws. And with this, they've created a huge confusion everywhere. So what you have is sort of a gray area of the law instead of clear legality in most countries. So then this becomes a question, you know, has been in the Netherlands, in Spain, in France, you know, in the United States. Are psychedelic mushrooms the same thing as psilocybin because they contain psilocybin? Is ayahuasca the same thing as DMT? And is the coca leaf the same thing as cocaine? The answer, of course, is that it's not. You know, I have a metaphor for this. It's sort of the same confusion. It would be like confusing, you know, taking a caffeine pill with, you know, having a nice conversation with your friends in a coffee shop. Or, you know, or going to a wine tasting, you know, event with, you know, shooting pure, you know, ethyl alcohol in your veins. You know, this is a ridiculous confusion. It comes from the way that pharmacologists think, because they think in terms of pure compounds. But this is without, you know, cultural aspects and without, you know, many things that come with it. So when coca leaf begins to arrive, which has been very rare, usually, it's been like immigrant populations, Bolivian nationals, and also some gringos that have gotten into Spain, and they arrive with, 2 kilos of mambe or 500 grams of leaves. Then, the prosecutor will very quickly try to say that these are 500 grams of cocaine or 2 kilos of cocaine. This is happening in Russia with very often with ayahuasca, for example. Or if not, they say that obviously the intention of these people is that they were bringing leaves because they were hoping to extract the cocaine out of these leaves, and they were just going to do this at home. So, part of the trials and the process has been, sort of explaining to the judges that A, this is very different, that B, that B, coca leaf is not the same as cocaine, and that C, that is, thoroughly impractical, just economically, energetically, and just in general, in terms of, in terms of payoff, to try to extract, a few grams of pure cocaine out of 2 kilos of mambe. And with this, at least in Spain, the judges have been quite understanding. Most of the cases have been won and people have been released. But in other countries, it hasn't been like that. There's been a recent case of a person that got caught in Bali with 20 grams of coca leaf, and he got a 5-year jail sentence.
5 years, wow, that's...
Yeah. So, there's about, I can't remember, I think there's about, I can't remember, it's like 1 or 5 grams of cocaine for each kilo of coca leaf. But that gives you an idea of how much actual cocaine was in those 20 grams, really a tiny amount. But they got a sentence like it was 20 grams.
It's very bizarre when you consider that cocaine is actually one of the substances that's still used in some places as for medical use when there's not an alternative anesthetic, even though actually it's not one of the ones that's being researched as having more benefits now. But it kind of almost seems like in this context, it's being vilified even more so than if it had a kind of useful medical parallel that everyone was excited about at the moment, like psilocybin.
This person might have been better off getting caught with 2 grams of cocaine because it looks smaller. There's also been a sort of uptick in Spain of raids during ayahuasca ceremonies. This was very, very new. This had almost never happened before in Spain.
That must be unpleasant.
Absolutely traumatizing. That
Can you imagine? Yeah. I mean, you can hear people screaming. I mean, it's awful. It's like full riot gear cops like storming into the middle of these sort of ceremonies with candles and people sitting on mats, and then they make these videos. They always cut the sound, but they make these videos where they just collect the most random objects, like a rapé blower, like look at this, and here's 450 euros. And here's some feathers of a bird that we believe is from an endangered species, and this sort of terrible, but it's a sort of a new. It's pretty much established in Spain among sort of judges and law officers that ayahuasca is not illegal. But now what they're doing is they're going for new things. They're saying, yeah, it's not illegal, but it's being used in sectarian environments as a tool for chemical submission. Or it's being used by people who are sort of falsely claiming medical effects, which is true. Some of the language that is used to communicate these things is unfortunately.
And that must have stepped up as the science has evolved, because there have been so many amazing ayahuasca studies in the past few years that, of course, people will be gravitating towards it for those benefits, right? So it might make quite a lot of sense that that's coming into the discourse when people are talking about what they can offer in a ceremony.
Yeah, I think there's a degree of ignorance that people don't understand what the medical corporation is and how proprietary they are of the concept of and the word medicine and of the word doctor and of course of the words for all the diagnoses and the conditions and medical conditions. So when you're using these, and they will get very upset very, very quickly. And this is creating a new set of problems that is much harder to defend against, because at the end, sort of criminal procedures is like, well, is it legal or not, and this can be argued. But when you go into sort of these sort of administrative things, like are you practicing medicine without a license, or is this some sort of like coercive, or they call them destructive sects? These things are much more difficult to prove or to defend against.
I mean, I question how appropriate the term medicine is as well, only because of this sort of Western idea, the Western connotations around the word medicine and that cultural pattern of being passive.
I guess there's a sense that you outsource your healthcare and someone else who knows better than you tells you what to do, and you take the substance and you just wait for whatever they said will happen to happen. Whereas in a ceremony, you're having this communion with the experience and you're fixing loads of things, and it's a much more active process, which I think in some ways is kind of the anathema of going to the doctor, is that has become customary.
Yeah.
I think sometimes lately I've been thinking a lot about the concept of care, and this the reason now in Spain there's a big pushback from sort of traditional doctors against what they call pseudosciences. That this sort of homeopathy and acupuncture and these things, they've gotten really popular in Spain to the point where you can buy homeopathy in pharmacies. And you can get master's degrees in acupuncture and even in homeopathy in famous universities that have also respected medical programs. So now there's been a huge pushback from the sort of medical establishment against these, and they complain that this is like pseudoscience and blah blah blah. And it reminds me sometimes of the way the church in Spain will complain that people no longer go there. Without ever wondering, just why is it, what's the sort of message that is being delivered there, and when I think, my own experiences with, going to the public, primary care doctor here, I'm basically facing a person that is only looking at their computer and writing things down because they have to fill this up before I leave, and they only have 15 minutes because that's how long it is. So they will listen to me without looking at me and looking at their screen and typing. And then they will either, order some tests, blood tests, x-rays, whatever, or prescribe some medicines, and they do this in 15 minutes. And so the technical, sort of the medical aspect, I guess, is there. What is lacking completely is the care, the personal relationship, this everything that you get, when you go to an acupuncturist. Well, tell me, where does it hurt, and blah, blah, blah. And then they touch you, they spend an hour with you. They actually make you feel things, they engage with you, and they see the thing as a whole. There's like, it's not just your backache, but, it's also your leg, and how this is connected to this other thing, and blah, 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 blah. So, and of course, you go all the way to the Amazon, and you go with sort of indigenous ayahuasca healers, and I just remember some just sort of hilarious sort of encounters that I've had with them, where the conversation goes sort of like, no estás bien, no, pero ya te vamos a curar. Right, so it's like it's I remember this guy saying like, yeah, you're not, I'll translate just in case, you're not doing well, but we're gonna heal you. And then there was another one who told me, ya te vamos a curar para que no pienses tantas cojudeces. Which was, we're going to cure you already, so you stop thinking so much bullshit. That's literally what the doctor says. So, it's a completely different relationship. That
and what
certainly
did that one
you.
identify as? Was he a curandero, or was he, what was his title?
He was very much a curandero. Yeah, he worked mostly with tobacco and with perfumes in the Peruvian jungle. Very old guy, very funny. And and I was thinking lately that there's a new definition of placebo that I really like. Is my favorite one so far. I've been fascinated with placebo because it amazes me that, basically we're talking about self-healing, right? So if you give people a placebo, you give them an inactive substance, and yet there's sort of like a physiological change. So, there's a sort of self-healing that happens. And yet we're trying to discard it as some sort of mistake or error or something wrong, and we give it sort of a despective name like placebo, like it's supposed to be like, like it's just, it's like, oh, you believed, you've been fooled, and therefore it doesn't count. It's like, why doesn't it count if there was actually an improvement of the symptoms? Like, why wouldn't it count? Because what? Because there was not like a pharmaceutical element, and so, traditionally sort of placebo was sort of called, some sort of like self-delusion, like, there's you're sort of, the person has been deluded into believing that they've been given something, and that's why there's a change that happens. But you're actually trying to write that off in scientific experiments.
They did do a study, they did a study on life expectancy once. Two groups of people, they had the same diagnoses, and depending on how long they told them they were going to live, had a very, very measurable effect.
Yeah, and that's nocebo, right? But the thing is, actually, you don't even need to fool people. You can tell people, listen, you're not going to believe this, but we found that for people in your condition, you can give these pills. They're actually inactive pills. They're sugar pills, but if you take them, you will get better anyway, and it still works. So it's not about the person being deluded or being fooled. It's about a form of consent that happens from the person that receives what is in fact an act of care, and what the effect that has on the person. So now the new definition of placebo that I like much better is that placebo is a physiological reaction to an act of care.
There is another word for that. That the Academy kind of Hawthorne effect. Does that ring a bell?
That does ring a bell to me actually as well, because Hawthorne was meant to be good for heart disease, but it wasn't actually that good. But it still works. It
was a person. They were trying to make factory workers like happier and sort of better workers, and so they sent lots of like researchers in to figure out how they could have a happier work environment, and they reached the conclusion that just the fact that the experimenters were there paying attention to these people and like asking them about
their work, caring about them.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, Spanish medical doctors get upset about the pseudotherapies and the pseudosciences. They're just sort of failing to acknowledge, that the reason why these people keep going there is because the care is much better. And I'm not even going to go into whether homeopathy works or not. It doesn't even need to work. You can still, you can accept, I don't, but you can accept that it's complete, and it's still effective, because that's what is at play there. And that's what people need. They not only need, medical care, they're not, like a car that you take to the garage and it just gets, you take a part out and you put a new one. I wish we were like that, but we're not. We're sort of human, and suddenly we require all of these extra things, and modern medicine denies all of them and tries to write them off.
But then you get it on both sides, don't you? Certainly, like many people here who are against pharmaceuticals fundamentally,
Yes, I think there's definitely a psychedelic exceptionalism that results in a probably quite unhealthy purist way of looking at things. That
very like us and them sort of.
Has as much segregation built into it as disapproving of psychedelics.
You need both, right? It's about identity. So you need what you prefer and you need what you reject. So to make you sort of believe that you're sort of standing, to sort of give shape to your identity. Once I heard somebody say that the immune system is the physiological equivalent of our identity. So, the immune system is what tells your body what is your body and what is not your body. And this cell belongs and this cell doesn't belong. This cell is an outsider. And in a way, your personality is the same. This is who I am and this is who I'm not.
And I guess you've got to differentiate that in terms of what's around you. There's no ability to do that in exclusion from the environment as a whole. So you're always going to be responding to it.
Well, we're not really taught to hold contradictory opinions either. or to be more than one person. That's pathologized, isn't it?
Yes, and to reduce ambiguity as far as possible rather than to accept it how it is.
And we put all sorts of outside things in our body. We put food in our body of every sort and type, and the immune system doesn't reject that, right? It's what are the pathogens, and then in the identity that becomes just like, okay, well, no pharmaceutical drugs, or no whatever, or I accept this but no Trump voters, or no, or absolutely no Irishmen, or whatever.
Plants. I'll only take psychoactive plants, and LSD is evil. It annoys me so much.
One of the things that I wondered
about,
how
identity gets built, or meat, or eggs, or or MSG, or everybody. The thing about this is that I think it's confusing when you look at it in terms of individual sort of choices, but it's universal when you understand it in terms of thresholds. Everybody has a threshold, whatever it is. So you can look at it with, for example, personal hygiene. Some people need to take a shower every day, and that's their threshold. Some people can go 5 days, and that's their threshold. Some people can go 2 months, but everybody has a limit, a threshold. That's what's common. At which point they're like, okay, this I cannot go beyond. Right?
One of the things I'm really curious about in relation to this is people don't tend to have kind of media dietas in the same way that they'll have a food dieta before an ayahuasca experience necessarily. I mean, sometimes there's the advice to do that, but I feel like people's consumption of media is so intimately related to what they feel about what they do and don't consume. And in a way, like this unchecked consumption of mainstream media that has all these attitudes that it's trying to inculcate you with that bleed directly into how you feel about drugs, and then how drug policy is formed on the basis of people's opinions and what's in the newspapers, and it's this really kind of intricate knotty trifecta. But yeah, I'm curious about how you feel the mainstream media plays into the attitudes that are shaping what we've just been talking about, and if you think anything could be done to improve its influence.
I think I think probably for now, for the present time, perhaps it's easier or more correct to talk about screens rather than media. But I think future generations might look at our screen use in the same way that we look at the way that people in Mad Men drink and smoke, but sort of like excessive and constant. So in these people had an ashtray on their bedstand, they woke up in the middle of the night and smoked and lit a cigarette, and they even woke up in the morning and the first thing they did while they were still in bed was smoke a cigarette. Right now we think that's sort of outrageous. There was all of these people smoking in bed, and even fires coming from people smoking in bed, right? All of these things are gone. But now instead we wake up in the middle of the night and we reach for our mobile phone. We wake up in the morning and the first thing we reach is for the mobile phone. And we are in a level of usage and constant pickups that perhaps to future generations might seem completely, sort of excessive, and it probably is. I've only done one media dieta. It was suggested by Charles Eisenstein in a course that he had, which was sort of like a course. It was very interesting. It was sort of like how to be a change maker and don't fall into desperation or cynicism type of thing. And that was the first dieta, and it was a media dieta, and you couldn't read any news, anything. And it was absolutely wonderful. And the point that he was trying to make is just because you don't get to realize that actually the world goes on, the world is fine, the cars are running, people are saying hello to each other, being nice, and you're in problems that are, thousands of miles away that you can't do anything about, that reading about and getting upset about doesn't change anything. The only thing it changes is their ability to sell more advertising, because making you upset keeps you glued to the media. Outrage is a great sort of traction builder. So it was very interesting. looking at my daughters, which are now the first generation born with the internet and the screens and the mobile phones, and that don't have a part of their lives before all of this.
Sometimes
it's kind of worrisome.
I've wondered whether the generation, like our parents' generation, is more addicted to things like Facebook.
I definitely feel that.
Wrongly feel that.
And it's also interesting because they're also the generation that grew up with the war on drugs being fought really prevalently and have this really strong idea of what addiction is and what it isn't, and like terror of drugs being addictive regardless of what they are, just because of the media portrayal, but then kind of unable to put down a phone without being able to recognize. And I guess maybe it would be different in somewhere like Portugal, where there's a kind of parity between addictive substances and addictive activities, but in the UK and the US there really isn't that.
Well, I think it's fair to say there's less community as well, and I think it's probably not fair to say generationally, but generationally and culturally.
Yes.
You know, if you live in Manchester and it's dark for 18 hours a day and freezing cold. And
did your conceptualization of your thoughts become as though there were flavors of the media when you didn't have the media? Because that happened to me when I did a silent meditation retreat. So I was without any kind of external impetus for 10 days. And I started to get this sensation of kind of like, that's a Daily Mail thought, that's more of a kind of tabloid thought, that's a novel thought. And it kind of felt like all of these types of media were recontextualizing themselves in what I had available, which was just my own thinking. So I'm curious if that's just me or if you had anything similar.
It's interesting. I found that I started dreaming about it.
About media?
Yeah, about getting an email or reading something, and then it's sort of like when I've done fasts and you start dreaming about food. It might be related. I never thought about it.
And how did you feel about it in your dreams? Were you like excited that it was happening?
Yeah. Oh, very engaged.
So funny. I've always loved it. I've had 2 occasions where I've not had a phone for a few weeks, and it really changes your experience of the world as well. Like, it's so many like synchronicities happen, and I meet more people. It's a lot more. There's less of a pattern, right? Because you're more open to your patterns being broken.
Yes, and I think also much more able to, for instance, really engage with a beautiful moment when you're not taking a picture of it. And it was really weird, actually, the first few days in the breaks and the meditation retreat, be kind of walking around the Chiapas countryside, and I'd think, wow, this is an amazing tree or sunset, and then I'd kind of reach my hand in my pocket and realize I didn't have a phone. And after a while, that became wonderful.
Do you think your memory of that is stronger because you didn't?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also, because unless you memorize the kind of specific tree roots on your way out of the garden and into the wild, you'd never be able to get back. So you really, really needed to have a conceptualization of some of the specific nuances of the sites.
I feel concerned about my own memory, and I think that's probably because everything. If someone tells you something, it's there. It's that you just look.
It's outsourced.
Yeah.
I remember it's terrible.
Yeah. But like how we can't
need it.
navigate. Yeah. We don't need to remember anything or navigate anymore. So
is that one of the biggest differences in the worlds that you tread in between the indigenous communities and then the policy realm of things, where the knowledge is much more something that's been passed down over generations and is kind of stored in the consciousness of people versus being looked up and kind of culturally conditioned in policy? Is that something that kind of plays a lot into how people discuss the things that they talk about in relation to substances?
My impression of policy is that it's a sort of highly complex sort of intertwine of rules and personal relationships and sort of forces. So there's sort of like Congress or the Vatican. They're very sort of established and set complex rules that theoretically everybody has to follow about how many votes you need in order to change this and that, and when is going to present it and how long you can speak. And then there's an incredible amount of sort of, I don't know what to call it, stuff that happens in the hallways, where things and conversations that happen at the personal level, where things actually get cooked, that are then pushed through this.
That's very much how it is in England. I spent the past 3 years working in a group called the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group. That is it's a lobby group that its main campaign is to reschedule psilocybin. I grew very, very disillusioned because of exactly what you were just describing, and because it felt like no change was necessarily ever going to happen because the whole system was rigged against change being made. So it was just this endless process of writing these very slightly differently languaged texts full of buzzwords and slogans that were not allowed to be significantly different from the last one, because otherwise it would be too radical to be digestible. So the change had to happen at this slow rate in relation to, is that the same everywhere that you've engaged with policy? That
I think so. It's the nature of those systems. And then what I have sort of seen or observed in indigenous communities, but again, they're much smaller, is that there is this lack of that sort of structural part about how many votes do you need in order to get, this or that, whatever. That's not prominent. And of course, the relations are very prominent. And also there is sort of very clear limits about, the peace that must be maintained. People that live in a tribe, they don't choose to live with each other, and they have to live with each other forever. So they until they die usually. And so there's not a lot of space for things that we take for granted, like getting very upset with someone, or having a fight and never talking to anybody. We are in a place where we have a disagreement with someone, or a strong disagreement, we can move to different neighborhoods or even different cities or even different countries and never see this person again. Tribal people don't get this, so they are sometimes early sort of anthropologists and stuff that came from Freudian perspectives, they consider them to be very highly repressed, that their emotions were highly repressed. But by this they mean that they look very stoic and they rarely ever express their opinions, and certainly their emotions in a very strong way. But this is, of course, has to do with the fact that this person is going to be there probably until you die or until they die. So there's not that much room for really making a. So when this comes to the level of politics and there's disagreements among, should we go this direction or that direction, among groups where like the sort of the authority of the chief, it's very relative. The authority comes from certain capacity or charisma, not from a power that they actually have.
Do most of the I just wondering, do most of the communities that you work with, do they speak Spanish, or do you have translators?
They have this book there. There's usually a few people that will speak some Spanish.
Right.
And then you need translators. And then this also comes from, observations and conversations that I have with other people, and that explain this to me. But in summary, it turns into very, very long debates. It looks like endless debates.
Yeah.
They look like endless debates where people are given freedom to talk for a very long time. Nobody's interrupted. And they just go on and on and on. And sometimes it feels really, really repetitive. But no one will stop anybody else. And then when people finish, no one will really contradict them either. They will say something like, my thought goes in this direction.
But they're not trying to win.
It will not be like our politicians arguing. And what they're doing is that they're building consensus instead. And that takes a long time because everybody has to repeat and repeat and repeat until slowly the discourse sort of gels into a common discourse. But it's not a give and take. It's not a give and take. It's not a negotiation. Well, I'll give you these two things if you agree to sign up to this other thing, as we sort of like to do, or as our politicians do.
Yeah, it's a gradual moving into multiple perspectives.
Or just that, or no, I mean, there is a sort of consensus there, or some sort of what they agree
Yeah.
that they're going to do, but it's just sort of massaged into existence. Instead of nailed into nailed into shape.
Oh, we did a session last year on that was largely about the metaphor that argument is war, how it's,